We've just learned how many consumer insolvencies there have been over the past year in Alberta, and surprisingly, insolvencies are down by 27%. But that doesn't mean we're out of the COVID woods yet when it comes to debt. Shawn Stack is the Vice President with Bromwich+Smith, licensed insolvency trustees. Good morning, Shawn.
Good morning, Mark. How are we?
Doing well. I hope you're doing well as well, and we appreciate you joining us to talk about this. Now, you had a look at the numbers, obviously, and saw that insolvencies are down by so much. Why do you think that is, particularly during a pandemic?
Yeah, Mark, it's a really interesting sort of conundrum, because you would think that given sort of the major impact that the pandemic has had on the economy in Canada, you would think that the insolvencies would have increased. But you're absolutely right. It's decreased this past year, and I believe it really has to do with sort of prioritizing our crises. So as people, when we're overburdened by debt, we kind of focus on that if that's our main focus. But because there's been so much other things going on, people have been sort of putting that to the side and looking at how do I deal with the initial crisis in front of me.
So are creditors also taking that into account? Like when they know that so many people are in crisis and they owe a lot and they might not be making their payments on time, they have to look at the big picture?
Well, 100%, yeah. So a lot the way our insolvencies in Canada work, it's either you can voluntarily file yourself into it, or you can kind of be pushed into it by your creditors. So it can be that sort of external push, Mark, that says, hey, you need to be doing this. And you're absolutely right to say the creditors, they've really dialed back their collection activities over the past year to allow Canadians sort of that breathing room. And of course, we wouldn't be where we were today without the great government supports to help Canadians to avoid insolvencies as well.
So what happens when all those creditors come calling later, right? Because they're not going to pay for themselves.
Well, that's the thing, right? And that's why I applaud you for talking about this and bringing attention to it, because the reality is that insolvencies year over year have been increasing as Canadians' debt levels have increased as well. And last year there was this enormous drop. So not only was there likely that there's the people that ought to have been filing last year because historically they would have been insolvent. There's going to be all those people that have been rendered insolvent due to the pandemic. So the more we can normalize this conversation and start to talk about what are the options available, the better off we will be as a community. When
is a good time for people to seek professional help when it comes to getting their debt load under control?
Yeah, I guess the place where I would be, Mark, is where if people are thinking about money all the time, right, and not in the sense of like it's just in the peripheral, but where it's like, how am I going to make this payment? How am I going to do this? That's a great time. If your creditors are contacting you, or you suspect they will, you should be looking at that. And the reality is, there's so much great information online that's available. And due to the pandemic, you can do a lot of these appointments virtually, by video, or by telephone.
Do you think people sort of wait too late to do it? Like if the earlier you do it, maybe the better off you'll be and the more options you might have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's much like exercise, right? Like nobody really wants to exercise, but the earlier you do it, the actual it doesn't make the exercise maybe any easier, but the gains certainly come a lot sooner. So it's important for people to start looking at their financial health like they do their physical health.
Now, when we talk about insolvency, is insolvency and bankruptcy, is it the same thing?
So it's a little bit different. So insolvency is a state that's an inability to make your payments as they become due. Or if you were to liquidate your assets, you wouldn't be able to pay your creditors. So it's a legal state. Bankruptcy is also a legal state, but what it does is it strips the citizen of all of their assets that come to the trustee, and then we distribute those assets to your creditors. So when someone is insolvency, they don't necessarily have to go bankrupt. They can actually file a consumer proposal, which is 6 in 10 of the Canadians actually elect that option.
So the proposal, I mean, I'm guessing it sounds like what the word is. In other words, you say, okay, I owe this much money. I'm making this much money. I can make these kind of payments. Would that kind of a deal work for you, creditors? Is that kind of what a proposal is?
Yeah, that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
It's through a licensed insolvency trustee that would do bankruptcies, and we would do a calculation to say to the creditors, listen, if a bankruptcy is triggered, this is likely what you're going to get recovered, and this is what your client and our client are offering to settle for you, and we think it's a good idea that you accept this. And Mark, the reality is the creditors, like we were saying earlier, they understand the predicament that we are in, and they're more than willing to settle.
And then how much does that cost the consumer? Obviously, you've got to pay the insolvency fees as well, right?
Oh, that's such a great question, because the reality is the costs associated with an insolvency or a restructuring, it's actually not borne by the consumer. It's actually covered through the legislation itself, pays the administrator or the trustee's cost.
Oh.
And what's and this is so fascinating, because we as people, we're so used to paying for a service that there's actually companies that have cropped up in the community that say, hey, listen, I can assist you with this. You pay me some money, I'll gather this information, and I'll make sure I get you this service. But the reality is that service is bringing you to someone like Bromwich+Smith or another licensed insolvency trustee in the community that does this for free, because we're actually paid out of the funds that are put into the proposal.
Wow, that is some information I think that people really could use, because I think they often see these ads and they think, okay, this is going to make it easier. It's funny that it feels a little like they're getting preyed on when that sort of thing happens.
I got to agree with you there. And in fact, the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, which is the division of the government, they're concerned about this as well. And they're making this as part of their business action plan for the 2021-22 year, is to try to bring this awareness to consumers. Because the last thing that you need, my friend, is when you're in this great vulnerable place, is to be preyed on or feel like you've been taken advantage of. And so people should feel really comfortable. Reach directly out to a licensed insolvency trustee. It's a free consultation. And again, the costs associated with the professional fees is covered within the proposal you put forward.
I think that is some great advice right there, Shawn, so that folks who are maybe feel they're in trouble, they can reach out and get that free advice to start things off, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would say, nothing to be ashamed of. We as people, we find ourselves in a bad place, and we become kind of crippled with our shame. The best thing to do is to move forward, be future focused. That's what 2021 is really about. It's about a year of hope and a year of redemption.
Shawn, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on, my friend.
Shawn Stack is Vice President with Bromwich+Smith, licensed insolvency trustees.